In the mid-18th century court of Denmark, a king reigned who was largely a figurehead, leaving a legacy of intrigue, reforms, and royal drama. He sired two surviving children, one who modernized a kingdom but died childless, and a daughter born into scandal whose descendants would shape Europe's royal houses for generations. Today, we'll trace their lives in full, from their births and upbringing through reigns, marriages, and legacies. What became of the children of King Christian VII? Why did one line vanish and the other flourish? Sit back as we explore the lives of Frederick VI and Princess Louise Auguste, two siblings whose fates tell as much about dynastic change as they do about personal ambition, political upheaval, and the shifting map of Europe. This video will take you through two chapters. First, the complete life of Frederick VI, the reforming king whose line ended with him, and second, Princess Louise Auguste, whose controversial birth led to a dynasty that still rules today. By the end, you'll understand how two children of the same troubled father could have such dramatically different legacies. Frederick was born on 28 January 1768, the son of King Christian VII of Denmark and Queen Caroline Matilda of Great Britain. From the moment of his birth, Frederick's life was marked by the peculiar circumstances surrounding his father's reign. Christian VII suffered from what historians now believe was mental illness, making him increasingly erratic and unable to govern effectively. The early years of Frederick's life were shaped by palace intrigue and political upheaval. His mother, Caroline Matilda, became embroiled in a scandalous affair with the king's physician, Johann Friedrich Struensee, who had risen to become the de facto ruler of Denmark. This affair would have profound consequences for the royal family. In 1772, when Frederick was just 4 years old, a conservative coup overthrew Struensee's government. The physician was executed, and Caroline Matilda was exiled from Denmark, never to see her children again. She died in exile in Celle in 1775, when Frederick was only 7. This traumatic separation from his mother at such a young age left Frederick to be raised entirely within the Danish court system, under the watchful eye of his father's regents and advisors. The loss of his mother and the instability surrounding his father's condition meant that Frederick grew up understanding he would need to assume responsibility far earlier than most crown princes. His education was carefully managed by court officials who recognized that Denmark needed a competent heir. He received instruction in languages, mathematics, history, and statecraft, preparing him for the burden of rule that seemed inevitable given his father's declining mental state. By 1784, when Frederick was 16, his father's condition had deteriorated to the point where effective governance was impossible. A regency was established, with Frederick officially taking on the role of regent. This marked the beginning of his real political career, though he was still guided by experienced ministers and advisors. The regency period was marked by significant reforms that would define Frederick's legacy. In 1788, he abolished the Stavnsbånd, a form of serfdom that had bound peasants to the land for centuries. This reform was revolutionary for its time, freeing rural Danes and contributing to agricultural modernization. The abolition demonstrated Frederick's commitment to Enlightenment principles and his understanding that Denmark needed to modernize to compete with other European powers. During this period, Frederick also worked to strengthen Denmark's neutrality in European conflicts. The late 18th century was a time of tremendous upheaval across Europe, with the French Revolution sending shockwaves through monarchical systems. Frederick's government pursued a careful balancing act, trying to maintain Denmark's independence while avoiding entanglement in the larger conflicts consuming the continent. In 1790, Frederick married Marie Sophie of Hesse-Kassel, cementing an important alliance and providing hope for the continuation of the royal line. The marriage proved to be both personally fulfilling and politically significant, though it would later be marked by tragedy. Frederick's marriage to Marie Sophie initially seemed blessed. Between 1790 and 1810, she bore him 8 children, suggesting that the royal succession would be secure for generations. However, fate had other plans. Only 2 daughters survived to adulthood, Caroline and Wilhelmine Marie. This pattern of high infant mortality was not uncommon in royal families of the era, but it proved particularly devastating for the Danish succession. Frederick and Marie Sophie watched helplessly as 6 of their children died in infancy or childhood. each death reducing the likelihood of a male heir surviving to continue the line. The surviving daughters, while cherished by their parents, could not inherit the throne under the succession laws of the time. Caroline was born in 1793 and Wilhelmine Marie in 1808. Both would remain unmarried and childless throughout their lives, effectively ending Frederick's direct line. This personal tragedy weighed heavily on Frederick throughout his reign. He had fulfilled his duty as a reforming ruler and modernizing force, but he could not secure the one thing that mattered most in a monarchical system: the continuation of his dynasty. Frederick's regency and later kingship coincided with the Napoleonic Wars, which would prove to be the defining challenge of his reign. Denmark's traditional policy of neutrality became increasingly difficult to maintain as Napoleon's empire expanded and Britain's naval power grew. Initially, Frederick attempted to maintain Denmark's neutrality, but the pressures of the continental system and British naval supremacy made this position untenable. In 1807, the British fleet attacked Copenhagen, effectively forcing Denmark into alliance with Napoleon. This decision, while understandable given the circumstance, would have catastrophic consequences. The alliance with Napoleon meant that Denmark was on the losing side when the emperor's empire finally collapsed. In 1814, following Napoleon's defeat, Denmark was forced to accept the punitive Treaty of Kiel. The most devastating provision of this treaty was the cession of Norway to Sweden, ending a union that had lasted over 400 years. The loss of Norway was perhaps the most painful moment of Frederick's reign. Norway had been an integral part of the Danish realm since 1380, and its loss significantly reduced Denmark's territory, population, and international standing. Frederick had little choice but to accept these terms, as Denmark lacked the military power to resist the victorious Allies. Frederick officially became king in 1808 following his father's death, though he had been the effective ruler for nearly a quarter century. His formal reign was marked by efforts to rebuild Denmark after the devastation of the Napoleonic Wars. Despite the loss of Norway, Frederick continued his reform agenda. He promoted education, supported agricultural improvements, and worked to modernize Denmark's economy. His reign saw the establishment of new schools, improvements in infrastructure, and the gradual transformation of Denmark from a primarily agricultural society to one beginning to embrace industrial development. Frederick also had to navigate the complex political situation created by the loss of Norway. The Norwegians had declared independence and adopted their own constitution before being forced into union with Sweden. This created ongoing tensions that Frederick had to manage diplomatically, as many Norwegians continued to look to Denmark with nostalgia. The king's personal life during this period was marked by his close relationship with his surviving daughters and his devotion to his wife Marie-Sophie. The royal family presented a picture of domestic harmony that helped restore some of the monarchy's prestige after the scandals and instability of Christian VII's reign. Frederick's relationship with his father Christian VII was complex and shaped by the king's mental illness. From his earliest years, Frederick understood that his father was not capable of normal paternal relationships or effective governance. This created a situation where Frederick had to mature quickly and assume responsibilities that would normally have been shared with or learned from his father. The absence of a strong paternal figure meant that Frederick's political education came primarily from ministers and advisors rather than from royal tradition passed down through the family. In some ways, this may have made him more open to reform and new ideas, as he was not bound by the conservative instincts that might have been passed down from a more traditional royal upbringing. Frederick showed remarkable loyalty to his father throughout Christian VII's life, never attempting to formally depose him, despite having the power to do so. This decision reflected both Frederick's personal character and his understanding that the monarchy's legitimacy depended on maintaining proper succession protocols. The experience of growing up with a mentally ill father also gave Frederick a deep appreciation for the importance of stable, effective governance. His reform agenda can be seen as partly motivated by a desire to ensure that Denmark would never again suffer from the kind of governmental paralysis that had marked the early years of his father's reign. Frederick VI died on the 3rd December 1839, having reigned for over 50 years, if one counts his regency period. His death marked the end of the direct male line of the House of Oldenburg in Denmark, as he left no male heirs. Modern historians generally regard Frederick VI as one of Denmark's most effective monarchs. His reforms modernized Danish society, his diplomatic skills preserved Denmark's independence during turbulent times, and his personal character restored dignity to the monarchy after the scandals of his father's reign. However, Frederick's greatest failure was his inability to secure the succession. Under the Salic law that governed Danish succession, the throne passed to his cousin Christian VII, beginning a new branch of the royal family. This transition, while legally straightforward, marked the definitive end of Frederick's direct legacy. The irony of Frederick's reign is striking. He was arguably the most competent and reform-minded Danish king of his era, yet his line died out completely. His daughters Caroline and Wilhelmine Marie never married or had children, meaning that Frederick's genetic and direct dynastic legacy ended with them. Caroline died in 1881 and Wilhelmine Marie in 1891, both having lived long lives but leaving no descendants. Frederick's reforms and modernization efforts had lasting impact on Danish society, but from a dynastic perspective, his reign represents a dead end. The crown passed to a cousin's line, and the direct descendants of the reforming king were lost to history. Princess Louise Auguste was born on 7 July 1771, and from the moment of her birth she was surrounded by controversy. Officially, she was the daughter of King Christian VII and Queen Caroline Matilda, making her Frederick's younger sister and a legitimate princess of Denmark. However, the circumstances of her conception and birth created questions about her paternity that would follow her throughout her life. The controversy centered on Caroline Matilda's affair with Johann Friedrich Struensee, the German physician who had become the power behind the throne. Struensee had arrived in Denmark in 1768 and quickly gained influence over the mentally unstable King Christian VII. By 1770, he had effectively become the ruler of Denmark, implementing radical reforms while conducting a secret affair with the Queen. Louise Auguste was conceived during the height of Struensee's power and Caroline Matilda's affair with him. While the official records list Christian VII as her father, many at court suspected that Struensee was her biological parent. This suspicion was strengthened by the timing of her conception and by her physical appearance, which some claimed resembled Struensee more than the king. The question of Louise Auguste's paternity became politically explosive when the conservative faction at court began planning their coup against Struensee. The possibility that the Queen's daughter was illegitimate provided additional ammunition for those seeking to destroy the physician's government and remove Caroline Matilda from power. When Louise Auguste was barely 8 months old, the conservative coup that would define her early life took place. In January 1772, the conspirators struck, arresting Struensee and forcing Caroline Matilda into exile. Struensee was executed and Caroline Matilda was banished from Denmark, never to see her children again. The coup left Louise Auguste in a precarious position. As the daughter whose paternity was questioned, she represented a potential threat to the legitimacy of the royal family. However, the new government chose to maintain the fiction of her legitimacy, recognizing that publicly questioning her paternity would create even greater scandal and instability. Louise Auguste was raised at the Danish court alongside her brother Frederick, though their upbringing was marked by the absence of their mother and the peculiar circumstances of their father's condition. The princess received an education appropriate to her rank, learning languages, music, dancing, and the social graces expected of European royalty. Despite the questions surrounding her birth, Louise Auguste was treated as a legitimate princess and maintained her place in the line of succession. This decision proved politically wise, as it avoided creating additional instability in an already troubled royal family. The princess grew up understanding her royal duties while also being aware of the whispers and speculation that surrounded her origins. The relationship between Louise Auguste and her brother Frederick was close, strengthened by their shared experience of losing their mother and growing up in the shadow of their father's illness. Both children learned early to rely on each other and on the court officials who managed their upbringing. In 1786, when Louise Auguste was 15, arrangements were made for her marriage to Frederick Christian II, Duke of Augustenburg. This marriage was politically significant for several reasons. The Augustenburg line had claims to the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein, territories that were personal possessions of the Danish crown but not formally part of Denmark proper. The marriage served multiple purposes for the Danish crown. It strengthened ties with the Augustenberg family, helping to secure their loyalty in the complex politics of the German duchies. It also provided Louise Auguste with an appropriate royal marriage that acknowledged her status as a legitimate princess while removing her from the direct succession line in Denmark. Frederick Christian was a cultivated man who appreciated the arts and maintained a sophisticated court in Augustenberg. The marriage appears to have been personally successful, as Louise Auguste adapted well to her new role, and the couple enjoyed a harmonious relationship throughout their marriage. The wedding ceremony was celebrated with great pomp in Copenhagen, sending a clear message that Louise Auguste was recognized as a full member of the royal family despite the controversies surrounding her birth. This public acknowledgement of her legitimacy was crucial for her future children's dynastic prospects. Louise Auguste quickly established herself as one of the leading figures in Danish high society. Her beauty, intelligence, and charm earned her the nickname Venus of Denmark among her contemporaries. She became known for her patronage of the arts and her sophisticated taste in fashion and culture. The princess maintained a prominent position at the Danish court even after her marriage, frequently returning to Copenhagen for important events and maintaining close ties with her brother Frederick. Her presence helped to legitimize the new royal generation and provided a sense of continuity with the pre-Struensee era. In 1794, Louise Auguste was present during the Great Fire that destroyed Christiansborg Palace, the royal residence in Copenhagen. The fire was a traumatic event for the royal family, destroying centuries of royal artifacts and forcing the court to relocate. Louise Auguste's composure during this crisis enhanced her reputation for grace under pressure. Her court in Augustenberg became known as a center of cultural refinement, attracting artists, writers, and intellectuals from across the German states. Louise Auguste's patronage helped to maintain the duchy's cultural prestige and reinforce the family's claims to independence and sovereignty. Louise Auguste's marriage placed her at the center of one of the most complex political issues in 19th century European diplomacy, the Schleswig-Holstein question. The duchies had been ruled by the Danish crown for centuries, but they were not incorporated into Denmark proper and had their own laws and customs. The Augustenberg family had historical claims to the duchies that competed with those of the Danish crown. Louise Auguste's marriage was partly intended to resolve these competing claims by uniting the two lines, but it actually created new complications for future generations. The Duchess understood the political significance of her position and worked to advance her family's interests while maintaining loyalty to the Danish crown. This delicate balancing act required considerable diplomatic skill and political acumen, qualities that Louise Auguste demonstrated throughout her adult life. The question of Schleswig-Holstein would eventually contribute to major European conflicts, including the wars of 1848, 1851, and 1864, and ultimately to the unification of Germany under Prussian leadership. Louise Auguste's children and grandchildren would find themselves on various sides of these conflicts, with their claims to the duchies serving as catalysts for broader political upheavals. Louise Auguste and Frederick Christian had several children who would prove to be of enormous dynastic significance. Their eldest daughter, Caroline Amalie, was born in 1796 and would later become Queen of Denmark through her marriage to King Christian VIII, Louise Auguste's nephew. Their son, Christian August II, inherited the Augustenberg titles and continued the family's claims to Schleswig-Holstein. He would play a significant role in the political upheavals of the 1840s and 1850s, though his ambitions would ultimately be frustrated by the changing balance of power in Central Europe. Perhaps most significantly, Louise Auguste's daughter, Louise Charlotte, married Wilhelm of Hesse-Kassel and became the mother of Louise of Hesse-Kassel. This Louise would marry Christian IX of Denmark, becoming known as the mother-in-law of Europe, and ensuring that Louise Auguste's bloodline would spread throughout European royalty. Through Louise Charlotte's line, Louise Auguste became the ancestor of numerous European royal houses. Her descendants would include the modern Danish royal family, the former royal families of Norway and Greece, and connections to the British, Russian, and German imperial families. The irony is striking. While her brother Frederick VI, the legitimate heir and effective ruler, left no surviving descendants, Louise Auguste, whose legitimacy was questioned, became the progenitor of multiple royal lines that continue to this day. Louise Auguste's relationship with her father, King Christian VII, was complicated by both his mental illness and the questions surrounding her paternity. Christian VII was rarely capable of normal paternal relationships due to his psychological condition, which meant that Louise Auguste, like her brother, grew up without meaningful parental guidance from the king. However, Louise Auguste was always treated as Christian VII's legitimate daughter in official contexts. Her name appeared in the royal genealogies, she received the precedence due to a princess, and she was included in state occasions and family portraits. This official recognition was crucial for her future dynastic prospects. The question of whether Christian VII was actually her biological father remained unresolved throughout her life. Louise Auguste herself apparently never publicly addressed the speculation, maintaining the dignity expected of a royal princess and focusing on her duties and family responsibilities. Some historians have suggested that Louise Auguste's strong character and political acumen may have been inherited from Struensee, if he was indeed her father. However, such speculation remains unprovable, and Louise Auguste's official status as Christian VII's daughter was never formally challenged during her lifetime. Louise Auguste lived until 1843, dying at the age of 72 after a long and eventful life. She had witnessed the transformation of Europe through the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, and the beginnings of the democratic movements that would reshape the continent in the 19th century. Her later years were marked by pride in her children's achievements and concern for the political upheavals affecting the duchies of Schleswig-Holstein. She maintained her dignity and royal bearing throughout the various crises that affected her family's claims and status. The Duchess was particularly proud of her daughter Caroline Amelie's marriage to Christian VIII of Denmark, which made Louise Auguste the mother of a Danish queen. This connection helped to solidify her family's position in Danish society and provided a bridge between the older Oldenburg line and the newer royal generations. Louise Auguste's death in 1843 marked the end of an era, as she was one of the last direct links to the dramatic events of the 1770s that had shaped the Danish royal family. Her funeral was attended by representatives of royal families across Europe, acknowledging her significant position in the complex web of dynastic relationships. The ultimate vindication of Louise Auguste's life came through her descendants' spectacular dynastic success. While questions about her paternity had made her birth controversial, her children and grandchildren achieved a level of royal success that exceeded even that of unquestionably legitimate princes and princesses. Through her daughter Louise Charlotte's marriage, Louise Auguste became the grandmother of Louise of Hesse-Kassel, who married Christian IX of Denmark in 1842. This marriage proved to be one of the most dynastically significant of the 19th century, as Christian IX and Louise's children married into royal families across Europe. Louise Auguste's great-grandchildren included King Frederick VIII of Denmark, Queen Alexandra of the United Kingdom, wife of Edward VII, Empress Maria Feodorovna of Russia, wife of Alexander III, and King George I of Greece. Through these marriages, her bloodline spread throughout European royalty. The contrast with her brother Frederick VI's fate is remarkable. Frederick, the unquestionably legitimate heir who ruled effectively for over 50 years, left no descendants. Louise Auguste, whose birth was surrounded by scandal and whose paternity was questioned, became the ancestor of multiple royal lines that continue to rule today. This dynastic success can be partly attributed to the strategic marriages arranged for Louise Auguste's children and grandchildren, but it also reflects the strong character and intelligence that she passed on to her descendants. Her children learned to navigate complex political situations and to make advantageous marriages that served both personal and dynastic interests. The contrasting fates of Frederick VI and Princess Louise Auguste illustrate one of history's most striking examples of how dynastic fortune can diverge within a single generation. Both children of the troubled King Christian VII, they faced similar challenges in their upbringing: an absent mother, an incapacitated father, and the instability of Danish politics in the late 18th century. Frederick VI, the unquestionably legitimate heir, devoted his life to serving Denmark. He modernized the kingdom, implemented crucial reforms like the abolition of serfdom, and provided stable leadership during some of the most turbulent decades in European history. His reign saw Denmark transform from a feudal society into a more modern state, and his personal character restored dignity to the monarchy after his father's reign. Yet despite his political success and personal dedication, Frederick's line died out completely. His 8 children were reduced to 2 daughters who never married or had children, ending his direct genetic legacy forever. Louise Auguste, by contrast, began life under a cloud of scandal and suspicion. Questions about her paternity followed her throughout her life, and her controversial birth might have derailed a less determined person's prospects. However, through a strategic marriage to the Duke of Augustenberg and the successful placement of her children in advantageous dynastic positions, she became the founder of multiple royal lines that continue to this day. The significance of their divergent legacies extends far beyond mere historical curiosity. Frederick's line ending meant that the direct descendants of Denmark's great reforming king were lost to history, while Louise Auguste's children and grandchildren shaped the royal houses of Europe for generations. Through her descendants, Louise Auguste's bloodline reached the thrones of Denmark, Norway, Britain, Russia, and Greece, among others. This dynastic success story demonstrates how royal bloodlines could spread through strategic marriages and how personal character could overcome even the most challenging circumstances of birth. Louise Auguste's great-granddaughter, Louise of Hesse-Kassel, became known as the mother-in-law of Europe, precisely because her children married so successfully into other royal families, creating a network of relationships that influenced European politics well into the 20th century. The legacy of Christian VII's children also reflects broader changes in European society during the 19th century. Frederick VI's reforms represented the old model of enlightened absolutism, where monarchs implemented progressive policies from above. Louise Auguste's descendants, however, found themselves navigating the more complex world of constitutional monarchy and democratic movements that emerged after the Napoleonic Wars. Today, when we see members of European royal families at state occasions or diplomatic events, many of them trace their ancestry back to Princess Louise Auguste. The current Danish royal family, the former Norwegian royal family, and numerous other European noble lines all descend from the princess whose legitimacy was once questioned. Meanwhile, Frederick VI, despite his greater historical importance as a ruler, has no living descendants to carry on his legacy. This paradox highlights one of the fundamental uncertainties of dynastic politics. Competence in rule and success in dynasty building do not always coincide. Frederick VI was arguably a better king than most of his contemporaries, yet his genetic legacy ended with his generation. Louise Auguste lived a more private life focused on family and local politics, yet her descendants shaped European history for centuries. The story of Christian VII's children also demonstrates how personal tragedies and political upheavals can have consequences that extend far beyond their immediate time period. The Struensee affair and Caroline Matilda's exile created the circumstances that shaped both children's lives, yet they responded to these challenges in ways that produced dramatically different outcomes for their respective lines. Perhaps most remarkably, the questions about Louise Auguste's paternity ultimately proved irrelevant to her dynastic success. Whether her biological father was Christian VII or Johann Friedrich Struensee mattered less than her ability to navigate the complex world of European royal politics and to position her children advantageously. Her story suggests that in the long run, character and strategic thinking may matter more than the circumstances of one's birth. So the next time you see a European royal at a state visit or diplomatic ceremony, remember this tale of 2 siblings from 18th century Denmark. One line came from the son who modernized a kingdom but died out despite his political success. The other came from the daughter born amid scandal and suspicion, but whose descendants shape monarchies still. That's what happened to Christian VII's children, a lesson in how dynastic fortune can diverge in the most unexpected ways, and how personal character can triumph over even the most challenging circumstances of birth.